So have a seat, please. This session is per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, forensics, destruction, in situ, and ex situ remediation. I'm the moderator. I'm Mike Dellas. I'm with the restoration program. I'm the restoration program manager for in NASA headquarters in the Environmental Management Division. With me, we have Dr. D, Dr. Paul Hatzinger, Dana Farmer, and Lauren Stone, and they'll be talking about topics that are of much interest. Our first presentation is Data Elements for PFAS Forensics by Dr. Doss with SGS North America. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Doss. Dr. Doss has spent more than 40 years in the analytical chemistry arena. His expertise spans chemistry, environmental analysis, hydrocarbon chemistry, forensics, industrial hygiene, laboratory services, air analysis, emergency contaminants, biota analysis, hazardous waste management, client services, management laboratories, laboratory builds, data validation, data management, sampling, laboratory audits, and litigation support. His biota continues. You can read that. But without further ado, Dr. Doss.
Good morning, folks. It's still morning. This is a unique topic. We call it the emerging contaminant, basically on PFAS, but it's still emerging. It's not done because of the number of compounds and what it entails and the methodologies. All of that is still emerging. And we are not done with the number of compounds either, because the definitions are changing very frequently. So what I have is an agenda. We'll go through some background material, and in that we'll learn what happened as of Monday this week. And then we'll look at what type of data and what type of analytical instruments you need to acquire PFAS data for doing forensics or even looking at what you have on your site. And then we'll talk about the fingerprinting part and the non-targeted analysis. If you look at it, it started with 18 PFAS compounds, went to 25, but the combo of the drinking water is 29. And then with the advent of method 1633, it's now at 40 compounds for DOD and EPA under method 1633. Even in that, the water method is perfected, but not the soils, tissue, sediment method yet. So that's forthcoming. EPA is going through the draft document on that. So you'll see where we fit in this mold of PFAS. And then we'll look at the forensics and the summary of it. So the first thing is standards availability. That was a big ordeal, and it's still a big ordeal. And that's why it took us a long time, because in total there are about 100 standards available currently, but that's not enough. Because if you look at it, the straight chains were like 4,000 to 6,000 PFAS compounds. But that changed as of Monday based on the definition of PFAS and what constitutes PFAS. And then how do we acquire the best set of data? That's a pet project for me. And the reason being is you want to protect your client from future liability or from going back and forth collecting samples from the same site. So you need to seek the expertise to design your experiment and the right laboratory who can accommodate those analytical requirements you come up with. And so that's a big thing, because if you look at foam analysis, right? If you have foam on your site for the firefighting part, you just cannot go with 537.1. There is more to it than that. In fact, you may not even see, depending on the foam you have on site, the PFAS present in that foam till you do additional analysis, which are not part of any protocols. So that's where the expertise comes in to tell you what all you need to look at, and then it's your choice, is how much money you want to spend and what data you want to know. So this is a typical tree, family tree for per and polyfluorinated alkylated substances, but there's much more beyond this. So I'm not going to dwell on all the classes as we go through it, because most people have seen these in the audience at some conference or another, because this is common. It used to be like one session, and now it's like 3 and 4 sessions at EPA conferences for PFAS. So I'm part of the EPA NEMC chair for shale oil and gas session and the forensic session. So I go through a lot of this. I'm familiar with hydrocarbon forensics. I can do interpretation, analysis, all of those things. So now PFAS is a pet project too. So ultra short chain PFAS. So in the classifications you had, all you had was the regular traditional straight chains, typically the long chains, PFOA and PFOS and PFNA and octanoic acid and all of that. The ultra short chain PFAS doesn't have an established method yet. We developed one, and we are running analysis. It cannot be done by the existing 1633 unless you make the modifications to it. So we presented that at Dioxin 2023 in the Netherlands about a couple of months ago. So the US EPA definition for PFAS is 2 carbon atoms dovetailed together with the fluorinated atoms and stuff like that. So, and then the European Union is the OECD. It's the Organization of Economics and Development and things like that. You'll see the definition in the next slide. And Canada follows the European definition as well. So there you have CF3 with 1 carbon or CF2 attached to another functional group. And that is the definition of PFAS. And the reason for that is 98% of the drinking water contamination in Germany is those ultra short chain PFAS. It's not your traditional PFAS we see in the US. So, and the ultra short chain is 2 and 3 carbon atoms. And then the short chain PFAS is 4 to 6. And then the rest of them are the long chain PFAS. So based on that definition, now from 6 to 7,000, it's greater than 7 million compounds for PFAS. So this is going to be an interesting definition and field, because you have incineration coming up, which is not perfected yet. So what is the fallout from those on emissions? And how do you go through and make the mass balance on that part of it? So it's going to be very interesting. And I think I advanced the... Okay, so that's what the definition is currently in the European Union and Canada. PubChem is a database which contains greater than 21 million fluorinated compounds. So in order to search that database as you go through, because there's not methods which accommodate all of these things. So how do you achieve that? That's one of the things we go through in the forensics part of it. So it's sophisticated data acquisition. It's not your traditional semi-volatile, volatile, or UTS standards, or however you want to look at it. It's very sophisticated, so very few labs have capability for PFAS analysis. And then it requires LC-MS methods, top assays, and adsorbable organic fluorine, which is a catch-all thing. And then you have the LC QTOF, which is quadrupole time of flight mass spectrometry. So when I started, the QTOF was more than 3/4 of one of the rows in your table. And now you'll see the picture. I have some pictures. And so it's condensed, but the flight tube is vertical rather than horizontal. And then the non-targeted analysis. There is very little expertise in commercial laboratories. Yeah, research organizations and universities have capabilities, but not your commercial labs. The first time I did it, it was very hard to extract the raw instrument files for us to process it as consultants to the industry. So we had to get help from the instrument vendor, extract the raw data files, and process it through our software, pick the peaks, and push it into the EPA CompTox database to do the library search. So it's very complex, folks, and you thought tentatively identified compounds in your volatiles and semi-volatiles were easy, but it's not, because anymore labs don't even interpret those pieces of data. All they do is look at the probability-based match, and if it's greater than 90%, whether that is the compound named or not, they call it that. It may not even be that compound. So this one is more complex than that because you have to do the workflow to submit to the CompTox database, and when the spectra comes back, you have to interpret it. That expertise is necessary in order to make a determination what you have from your NTA analysis. So isotope dilution, for the longest time, methods were not following the isotope dilution, so you have the recoveries like your parent compound. So you have to spike it with isotopes. And all of these are expensive propositions because of the standards cost. And not all standards vendors make them either. So that's why standards is an issue. So in order to avoid the standard barrier, that's why you do the NTA analysis. So where do we fit in as a company, right, as a lab? So we were the ones who developed method 1633 for EPA and DoD and handed it to them. Under the Clean Water Act, there is a requirement based on what method serves which community. So if it affects the entire country, then you will have to perform a minimum of 9 lab validation. So that's what EPA did after we handed them the method, and then came back, and I think they did more than 9 labs, and then perfected the water method after so many drafts. And now they're working on soils and all of that. I don't know why this keeps advancing, though. So that's what we did for the EPA and DoD. And then we developed a method for the tissue, water, sediments, and all of that too, which is under evaluation right now. It's part of the same method. And then we developed a method for AFFF. Since this does not affect a larger population of our country, so they did a 3-lab validation on the AFFF foam. And not all labs perform AFFF foam analysis because of the complexity of it, and also the contamination part of it in the lab if you're running drinking water, and side by side you're doing the foam. And all the foams contain between 3 to 6% PFAS compounds in them. And then what type of data is necessary? So basically this follows the same trend: historical data, firefighting activities. And firefighting activities in refineries or plants is easy to track, whereas in a pipeline part, people forget there was a fire some time ago on a pipeline, and that's going to haunt you later on down the road, which you never even knew. And historically, some of those people may have retired. So you won't have anything like that. They just get rid of the fire and go on. So that has to be remembered. And then the types of foams. And the reason for the types of foams is what analytical you performed and whether you captured all of the PFAS compounds in that foam. And then any type of polymers. So there are unintended consequences when you buy polymers. You may think you're buying a certain polymer, but you never analyzed it for any PFAS in it. Example, the groundwater contamination in New Jersey with PFNA was an unintended consequence. And the people who bought the polymer didn't even know PFNA existed in that polymer. And then everything else in the site, you have to account for. So analytical data-wise, my recommendation would be LC-MS for your regulatory purposes. AOF is just a screening tool. It's combustion IC is what it is. So it'll capture all the fluorine atoms. And the standards don't equate to what you find as PFAS either. So you need to be aware of that when you do AOF. Yeah, if it comes out clean, then you're safe to say you didn't have any fluorinated compounds at your site. And then LC, quadrupole time of flight mass spectrometry, and then GC, I'll tell you all about the application on that. And then the non-targeted analysis software part of it, and then the expertise required, all of that. And then the ComTox database has 875,000 compounds, but PubChem has more than 7,000 PFAS compounds and greater than 21 million, or 7 million and 21 million fluorinated compounds. So the field changes. So I have some pictures of what your normal 1633, 537, 533, all of those methods use this. So basically, what happens here, folks, it's a single ion monitoring analysis is what it is. So it's not a full scan. So you don't pick up everything other than what you're looking for and the standards you're looking for. So it's very finite is what this method is, and that's what the current methods are. And then you have the LC, quadrupole time of flight, high resolution mass spec. And it goes in full scan, and the sensitivity is adequate to determine for your regulatory levels whether the state or federal or however you want to look at it. So, and it's high resolution for peak resolution part of it. You'll see, I have the next slide, which shows the peaks present under one of those peaks. Basically, if you look at this peak here, it consists two peaks, and in your LC, MS, you wouldn't have separated it. Whereas high resolution, you separate it because the mass goes, like for example, in your regular quadrupole mass spectrometer, it's a unit mass. So if a compound has a molecular weight of 275, it just gives you 275. Whereas in a high resolution part, it goes to 275.1234. So the resolution is 10,000. That's what separates compounds. And very few people have those expertise, so that makes it harder. The only other place where you use high resolution mass spectrometry is dioxins and PCB congeners. And then this is your GC instead of LC. This is typically used on air samples. And so that's a Hewlett-Packard one, or I call it Hewlett-Packard. It's Agilent is what it is, which is represented in there. I go back, way back to the first mass spectrometer ever Hewlett-Packard manufactured. So that's, it's a resolving power to separate the components. And now you need to correlate this unit to your new definition. So that's what will make it very interesting, whether it's fallout from incineration or whatever the situation may be. And then adsorbable organic fluorine, basically it's a combustion IC. Typically when you run chlorides, fluorides, sulfates, all of that, it's not combustion. So you combust the thing at 900 degrees, your sample, and then that flows into your titration unit. And that's how fluorine is measured. And then fingerprinting part, basically you need to look at all aspects of what you have in your samples. You have a long list of targets, about 100 of them because you have standards. And then branch chains, that'll give you the definition from which manufacturer who made the PFAS. You can tell from the branched chain allocations in your sample. And then the top assay. So top assay is total oxidizable precursors. So a lot of the PFAS have precursors in them. Unless you oxidize it, you won't see them because your analysis on LC-MS is single ion monitoring. So that's why it makes it difficult. And top assay is necessary, folks. You will see why. I've got some data for it. Surface water, runoffs, all of them you need top assay because I've seen data where if you don't do the top assay, you miss the boat. Especially when you're in litigation down the road, you'll be wondering why. So depending on how sophisticated the opposition is. And then high-resolution mass spectrometry, you definitely need it, especially when you have a finite number of standards. And then linear and branch, like I said, electrochemical fluoridation. So you can determine what the process was. In terms of that, say, if you didn't find the branch chains, then you can isolate it and move in a different direction when you go through the interpretation. Yeah, it's the same thing. You can see the gray peaks as the branch chain isomers. And then the linear chain is the orange ones with a deuterated compound below it. So top assay shows significant non-target PFAS you didn't measure, literally. And that method came out of Australia, and that's what people use. Not all labs perform top assays either because they don't understand the whole oxidation process. And yeah, people call biotransformation and all of that, but not all PFAS molecules undergo biotransformation. If you go to the ITRC website, there's more literature to that, and it's constantly updated every month. And now they have a work group too. And there's since there's no method, I brought it up in ASTM D19, and EPA is part of that. And now they're looking at top assay method to standardize it. No two labs have the same process for top assay either. So they formed a work group, and now they're going through a few labs who are interested in participating in it with an NDA being written up. So that's what the status on the top assay method is. But it must happen. Without that, you're missing the boat. And look at it, 300% increase after top assay. So, and the next slide will show you what happens before oxidation on a foam. There are 4 or 5 foams in there. You didn't see any PFAS. And if you didn't do the top assay, you missed the boat on the right side after oxidation. And here's another data set which was done in our lab on biosolids. Look at the orange bars in there. And they showed up after the top assay. Previous to the top assay is what's in gray on the bar chart. And we continually do these things because we have a lot of research projects going on in one of our laboratories. So that's how we determine what's going on based on client needs and how the client wants to proceed with what they have to look at. So standardization issues, this is what I mentioned, and EPA is working on it to come up with a method for top assay. And then the non-targeted analysis. This is, like I said, when you measure it in high-resolution mass spectrometry, instead of 175, it's 175.9591. There's a million or 1 in a million chance it'll be the same compound, is why high resolution is important. That's how we do high-resolution dioxins. I've done quads, triple quads, high-res. So high-res is very unique, and the sensitivity is so high. And full scan mode spectra is what you acquire, not your single line monitoring you see in your 537 or your 533 or 1633 method. So that's why it's very sophisticated. Very few labs, the traditional dioxin labs will have it. Other than that, the normal labs won't have high resolution mass spectrometry. And they're expensive too. In my days at the bench, we paid about $600K for each instrument, and we had 4 of them. So technology has improved too, so the efficiency and the software and how you process data is much better than when I was. The tuning would take sometimes 3 days for the 10,000 resolution. Now it's plug and play type situation, and all the new analysts enjoy the benefits of it. And then again, this is very complex, folks. Once you get the analysis done, peak picking is a big thing, and what functional groups you put through the CompTox database. So universities have them, and also postdoctoral students are whiz kids at performing software functions. Hardware is taken care of by the professors, and the software, it's amazing. I was at ASMS in June. Amazing software programmers who are chemists even at university. So that's why you find the talent as well. And then determination of the precursors, complex spectral interpretation. There are very few dinosaurs who can interpret spectra. And then pattern recognition and all of that comes with it once you get and acquire all the necessary data. And then statistical approaches. So that's where the forensics part comes in. Once you got the data, you do the traditional cluster analysis, PCA, multivariate part of it, linear mixing models, all of that. Very few people in a normal laboratory understand statistics and how to get that data processed and come up with a determination. So that's why you need expertise. So in summary, basically it's complex analysis. Seek expertise right from the beginning, when you design your experiment and what the outcome is. And then the sample collection protocol, all that has to be agreed upon before you start your project. And then you have to put all this in writing, because as a laboratory you may advise somebody, but in the end, when it comes to litigation, then you have to watch your P's and Q's and what your opposing party does too. So that's very, very important. So with that, thank you for your attention, and if you all have questions, comments, I'll be glad to take it now or after. My contact information, you'll see it. It's very easy to remember. Dr.Doss@sgs.com. Thank you.